Hi everyone, today we are going to dive into some examples of some microcycles and kind of take them apart a little bit and talk a little bit about what could maybe be better about them and maybe some things that are good about them. And we're also just going to review some of the materials that we've covered so far in this program. And I would highly encourage you to revisit the programming and periodization discussion, as well as the exercise order discussion for practice and application, as well as our Excel day, so where we talk about the Excel templates and exactly how to kind of go about using them to display this awesome program that's rational and logical and backed by science and experience and is high quality. So we don't want to have all this information and good stuff going on in our heads and not be able to display it and explain it to other people. So here's our first example. Okay, so here's our first example. And now's a good time if you want to pause and take a moment to look over this before I sort of talk about some of the things that I see on it. That way you can sort of test yourself and challenge yourself a little bit. All right, so let's say we've all had a chance to look over this program and review it a little bit. So we'll sort of start talking about some things that I see and that I would maybe adjust or change. One is I would make sure to have, and again, this is just a microcycle, so we're looking at a week of training that would possibly be like the first microcycle of 4 weeks of a mesocycle. So one of the first things I would say is I would love to see what population this is for, what season is this for, and what are the goals of this program. If I know the goals, that makes life so much easier because it's our goals that determine and drive all of our decisions and all of our other actions. And so having looked at this beforehand, some notes that I made, let's look at that push-pull ratio. And looks like I count them up ahead of time, but there's about 7 knee dominant exercises and only about 3 hip dominant exercises. And there's no upper body pushes or pulls in this program, which depending on your sport and your activity, that's kind of taken away. I wouldn't really encourage, I can't really think of any athlete who's able-bodied and healthy. I can't really think of any athlete who I would discourage from training the upper or the lower body. Even if you were an arm wrestler, I would still encourage you to train the legs, just because all the benefits that come with training the whole body and getting stronger from head to toe. And also the stress on the low body helps change some of the hormone profiles and can actually have a big impact on your ability to improve on the upper body. So the push-pull ratio, there's 7 knee dominant to 3 hip dominant, and that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit much. There's no warm up or cool down on the program. Let's see. As far as the exercise order, while keeping big limits and lift on day 2. Day 2, the deadlift is coming in the D block, so that's okay, day 2, that deadlift doesn't occur till down here. Depending on how aggressive you're encouraging athletes to be, I would probably not put my biggest, most stressful movement so late in the day. Also watch out for I think that's a typo there, if they're looking to spell cable in the traditional format. What else have we got here? So the deadlift is pretty late. There's no supersets on the first 2 days, and then days 3 and 4 don't even have the order filled out. So as a lifter, as an athlete, I wouldn't really know exactly if I'm pairing exercises, if it's a circuit, if it's a triset. So I don't really know what's going on there. So there's no rest prescription included. There's no tempos included. Yeah, so we're just missing a lot. So this would be sort of this is sort of a tough program. This is this is from a previous example where they were just a little bit behind, and it's sort of a rough draft. So I would say that this one has some room to improve. So some other things that we might want to point out while we're here or revisit. One is that everything is in its own individual block. There's no supersetting based on the order here. So depending on how much time you rest, let's see if we do a little question mark there. All right, pretty terrible question mark. Looks like a hook. So depending on how much rest you're doing, if you don't have any movements that are supersetting, you're going to have long lifts. And that's fine, but it's not very efficient. And there's just not a lot of organization or structure or flow in this lift. So we're going to move on, but I would just say this is an example of someone who just had a lot of room to improve. And this is just kind of rough. And so sometimes we put something like this down on paper, and it's really clear to us, but the people we're trying to explain it to, they're lost. So that's why it's so important that we get some of these sort of nitty-gritty details involved to just easily explain what the heck we want them to do. Okay, so let's move on to another example. Now is a good time to pause and maybe review it yourself, and maybe look for some things that are missing or could be improved. All right, let's move through. Kind of talk about some of the things that I found. Okay, so it looks like we are upper body push dominant. And when we're upper body push dominant, one of the best things we can do is either increase our volume of pulling, upper body pulling, or to just decrease our volume and frequency of upper body pushing. And upper body pushing in a push-pull ratio seems to be an issue because of the way that our shoulders are structured, and when we live in modern society, we're often stuck behind a wheel of a car driving, we're doing a lot of texting, we're sitting at desks performing work and typing, and so a lot of times we get shoulder impingement, and we get rounded, shoulders that are rounded forward. And so that's why that push-pull, with that push-pull ratio, when our upper body has a push-dominant push-pull ratio, that can just be a problem. Let's see if I can get a little bit of a better camera angle. It's not super important, but so watch that push-pull ratio on both the upper and the lower body. All right, so they've included push-ups twice a week and sit-ups twice a week. Let's see, so there's sit-ups 1, sit-ups 2. There's a push-up. Where else is there push-ups? There's another push-up. So there's nothing wrong with doing push-ups or sit-ups twice a week, but looking at the sort of array of movements that are put into this microcycle, it just seems like you could maybe vary it up just a little bit more. So with the push-ups, okay, let's look at some pushing. And again, remember, we have a push-dominant program right now. So by getting rid of one push-up, that really would have sort of saved us some trouble and brought the push-pull ratio to a little bit more of a neutral position. And that sit-up, we've talked a little bit about Dr. Stuart McGill, and some of the teachings that he's provided us on the benefits of core stability versus core flexion exercises. So the sit-ups, there's no such thing as a bad exercise, but if we've got, let's see, and there's a third sit-up actually. So we're doing quite a few sit-ups. So we've got some sit-ups there. Let's look for some core stability movements. There's a nice core stability exercise. There's a nice core stability exercise in the warm up cool down. So really, I guess every single day we're doing sit-ups every day in our cool down, and they're on specific days of training. So that's a lot of sit-ups. And then we see that we've really only got one day or one or two core stability exercises. So incorporating more dead bugs or planks or power off presses or bird dogs. You know, these are some easy things that we could have done to maybe boost the health of the athlete. So again, sit-ups and push-ups are not inherently bad, but are they the best thing for the job? Maybe not. What else we got going on? Day 4 has 3 big lower body. All right, so let's look at day 4. Day 4, and this is just sort of a tough one. You know, you kind of, once you start programming, you kind of get lost in the weeds sometimes. But let's look at day 4 and that B block. And, you know, if we're looking to build strength here, when we pair front squat with the dumbbell walking lunge, with a kettlebell swing, these are all 3 great exercises, but to pair them all together could be really challenging. And if we're looking at maybe 2, I don't know if they mean that this is like a warm-up set and a kind of a work set, or if these are supposed to be 2 work sets. Let's say these are 2 work sets here. You know, by the time we get to that second round, because remember, look at the way that the order is designated: B1, B2, B3. So that means we're going to front squat, then we're going to dumbbell lunge, then we're going to kettlebell swing, then we're going to come back to the front squat again. So is your second set of front squats really going to be that? Are you really going to be set up for success, or are you going to be a little fatigued from your dumbbell walking lunges and your kettlebell swings? I think I would be if I'm working hard on those other exercises, and if I'm not, you know, if we were just doing like teaching days or something like that, or a technique day, maybe you could argue that. But I really don't see myself programming those 3 movements in a circuit when I'm pursuing strength training. And I would gather that we're pursuing strength training based on some of the volume of those sets. Now, maybe they challenge me and say, you know, no, it's like a teaching or an instructional day, something like that. But it looks a little bit more like volume. And 6 kettlebell swings is pretty minimal. So I'm not loving that B block on day 4 for those reasons. Okay, so percentage based movements. Oh, where do we go here? Now for percentage based movements, this exercise scientist who wrote this program, they were sort of taking a shot at doing some programming here. And that's not terrible. You know, you're giving a window, which is okay. You don't always have to be assigning percentages to the single. If you give a range sometimes, that's okay. But even if I'm opening up, even if my first set is on the lightest end, like 75%, I would say let's make sure to designate, let's give them some space to get warm-up sets into that working range. Just give them a reduced chance of injury and an increased chance of having high performance. So 75%, let's say you squat, if you're a 300-pound squatter, 75% is going to be 225 pounds. So if your first set, no warm-up, is at 225 pounds, think about that. That can be a little stressful. So it might be nice to get at least 1 or maybe 2 warm-up sets leading into that low range of percentage. And if you're not coaching up, you know, if you're not telling them the first set is supposed to be at 75%, maybe an athlete's feeling good and they want to jump up to 85% because they see the numbers and they're feeling strong, they've been working hard, and maybe they want to take 85%, you know, right out of the gate on set 1. Well, if you have that 300-pound squatter, 85% of 300 is going to be 255, right? Yeah, it's gonna be 255. So 255 pounds for their very first set with no warm-up sets. You're kind of playing with fire there, so that could be troublesome. So that, again, it's okay to have ranges. We don't have to be omnipotent. We don't have to know it all. It's okay to collaborate with your athletes a little bit and encourage them to have some say in the programming just a little bit. But this is a little bit too vague. We're not really. We've got a big weight window there. We've got no warm up sets. So I think that it's an okay step in the right direction, but I just think there's several ways that could be better. Okay, so two more things. And I kind of know from this program did list strength as their goal. But let's look a little bit at our so for strength, we know that for strength, optimal strength development is going to be 6 reps and less and 85% and above of our 1 rep max. So we might be touching 85% here. Maybe we're just touching it, which is okay. If we're assuming that this microcycle is week 1 of a mesocycle, then maybe we do want to start on the lighter end. But 5 reps at 85% is near maximum. So for week 1, that's pretty high intensity. And we're going to revisit those charts pretty soon here. But just kind of bear with me a little bit. And if we're looking for shoulder press, those reps are high. And that time under tension is a little high if this is supposed to be a strength development movement for the shoulder press. And maybe look at this block as well. Again, big upper body movement, big upper body movement, and big upper body movement. 3 complex or compound exercises in a row of significant challenge when we're trying to develop strength. Doesn't mean that's bad, but that's pretty challenging, and that might not be ideal for having athletes feel good and go into a set prepared to perform. And I think you're going to get some diminished returns from one set to the next, and even worse going in, because that nervous system and those ATP levels, those phosphocreatine levels are just going to be kind of dragged down. Now, we don't know how much rest is going to be involved, so that's another problem. And I don't know, even if there was 3 or 4 minutes in between sets, I still don't know that I would encourage this flow or this kind of setup on that block A there. So yeah, we didn't program in the rest, and that's going to be pretty big, because what's going to happen is not only are our lifters not going to know how long to take in between, and what they might do is they might be lifting on heavy days and they may feel good, but it's only been like 45 seconds, and then may get back under the bar and then have a crummy lift or get buried by it, because your phosphocreatine levels are just not going to be replenished very much in 45 seconds. So if you're on early warm-up sets and the weight is light, yeah, you can have shorter breaks, but once you start lifting heavier, that's a good time to just slow things down. So to encourage or direct the rest time is a good idea. Or if you want them to pick things up and move a little bit faster, you want them to know how little time you expect them to be resting. So these are just sort of the basics of setting parameters and explaining what it is that you want. All right, so let's say this third program here gets a little bit better as well. And so I know that this is a strength development program. So let's take a look at some of the feedback that's been provided. Day 1, and let's see. If you're interested, now is a good time pause and maybe review this before we sort of pick it apart. And whether or not you've taken a moment, we're going to move on and sort of go over some of the feedback that I've provided. Day one includes both bicep curls and rows. Let's see, let's do some rows away from curls. Day one, what day was that? Day one, D block. Oh, there we go. Okay, so day one, D block. Sorry about that. It took me a second to figure out what was going on. All right, so we've got bicep curls on D1, and then on D3, we have some single arm rows. And nothing wrong with some bicep curls and nothing wrong with single arm rows. But when we're putting them together in the same complex, what you're kind of risking or encouraging is some it's called synergistic dominance. It's when a smaller muscle that's supposed to be just a little helper is so activated that it becomes a dominant or primary mover in the movement. And that's a lot of times what happens if you pair a bicep curl with a row. And so if you want those rows to just help your arms get massive, then this is not a bad protocol. But if you want those rows to help your back get stronger, I wouldn't pair the bicep curl movement, the incline hammer curl. I wouldn't pair that with the single arm row for that reason. I don't want to risk the synergistic dominance because it's going to make it harder for me to attack my back if my biceps are really primed from another movement. Now, if you don't really care about what's going on there and you just want the arms to grow, then maybe this is a great set for you. But if we're looking for sport performance and improving strength, I would rethink this setup. Day two C block. Day two C block. Okay, some interesting. Day two C block is right here. And that leg press, it looks like it's going to be building towards maybe some strength development. So the percentage is a hair light, but the volume makes me think that maybe we're looking at percent, or maybe we're thinking about some strength development there. And then being paired with a jump rope, that's not necessarily bad, but is it really optimal for going back and having a heavy leg press? It could hold some athletes back, others it might be no problem. And then let's also point out a little bit of how unclear that, oh gosh, now I'm guilty of it. But how about our rest time? We have rest times included, but when you set it up like this, does it mean that it's 3 minutes of rest from our C1 and before we go to C2? Or is it 3 minutes of rest from C2 before we're back to C1? Is it both? Is it one or the other? We're not really sure. So just make sure to maybe clarify that just a little bit better. So maybe they would drag this line out here, and maybe they keep this like a 0 or an X, or really just putting the line here is going to indicate how much rest from C1 before C2, and then maybe we would know a little bit better there. So maybe that would change my opinion on whether or not that's a good superset. Okay, and then let's see, I mentioned maybe some more warm-up sets and maybe some more tempos. So yeah, looking at our bench here, we've got 5 sets of 3, all at 75%, and that's a fairly doable prescription. But 1 or 2 warm-up sets ahead of time may help. Or if those are assumed, maybe something like a note, like warm up as needed. But again, I would encourage us as we're practicing our programming and practicing putting in every little detail, I would maybe encourage you all to actually maybe put in their exact warm-up, give them some warm-up sets up here, whatever it is, whether it's like a set of 40% by 5 and then 60% by 4, and then you can go into 5 sets of 3 to 75%. So again, just to kind of take control of the program and do our best at helping them succeed. And then let's see. And this coach has used tempos. Let's see, there's a tempo, there's a tempo, there's a tempo. That one's got a tempo, that one's got a tempo. Each of those has a tempo. And that's good. You don't have to put an exact tempo on every single thing, and you don't have to put a percentage on every single thing. But to kind of grow your ability to control things. Like I could see maybe a tempo on the cable row could be good. You can see maybe a tempo on the chin up. This is a row machine. So there's some opportunities to put tempos in there more often, and I wouldn't go tempo crazy. Again, you don't have to put them on every single thing. All right, so those are sort of 3 examples, and that's just some things that we could have maybe been a little bit better about. And then now we're just going to spend a handful more minutes sort of reviewing some things and reflecting. So remember that each microcycle is one of 4 microcycles in a mesocycle. And not every mesocycle has to be 4 microcycles. But for the purpose of this program, that's how we will be discussing it and sort of defining it. And if these microcycles are all going to be that green base week, we need to understand that we want to begin with the end in mind. So make sure that your programs, you don't necessarily want to be maxing them out, but you want to be setting yourself up for success. And again, and this is using Coach Joe Ken's philosophies and teachings from his book, The Coach's Strength Training Playbook. So again, remember how's your microcycle going to play into a mesocycle? So be thinking about the 2 different types of mesocycles that we've reviewed. And then with your mesocycles and your microcycles, these are really all just part of a bigger picture, right? We're talking about annual training and training for goals, and every week can basically fit in to the big picture. So let's make sure that we sort of keep some of these charts in mind. Let's keep some of these charts in mind. And if you can't read them now, I've really just pulled this slide from some of our previous discussions. Keep these charts in mind. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one, because let's remember that with our template, we have the tempo, the opportunity to insert tempos at the same place that we use the exercise name. And it's going to go EICI, so eccentric, followed by the isometric, followed by the concentric, followed by the other isometric. So if this is our designation, then our time under tension per rep is going to be 5 seconds. That time under tension, when we're talking about strength training, as you see up here, that optimal time under tension is going to be 4 to 20 seconds. So if this is a 5-second time under tension, between 1 and 4 reps for that time under tension would be the optimal time under tension. So anything anything below 4 seconds, you're not really giving yourself enough time to handle heavy loads and grow strength. Because if you're moving it faster than that, you're probably not challenging your muscles because the load is moving so quickly. And anything longer than that, it's probably a little bit too light, because within that 20-second window, we usually end up utilizing all of our phosphoprotein stores. And you can see that when people are lifting heavy, when they're running fast, around that 20-second mark, people tend to sort of gas out, and they have to downshift for whatever reason. And the reason is that we're running out of ATP and phosphoprotein. And just another thought on this tempo sort of designation is that each of these 3 different tempo designations are actually the same time under tension. They all equal that 5-second mark. So when we are programming, if you have an individual who's looking for hypertrophy, or if you're doing concurrent training and you have an exercise or a block in a given day and you want it to be hypertrophy based, remember that optimally you're going to be training about 40 to 60 seconds. So if you're using any of these tempos, you'd be using about 10 reps. Because 10 by 5 is 50, and so it puts you right in that window. You could also do 8 reps, because 10 by 5 is 40, or excuse me, 8 by 5 is 40. Or if you use 12 reps, 12 by 5 is 60. So anywhere from 8 to 12 reps of any of these 3 tempos would put you over in that optimal time under tension. And then along with that, you want to pair that with the appropriate reps, sets, and training percentage. So just something to keep in mind. This chart that keeps coming back to haunt us in this program, I just wanted to touch on it again, just real quick. I think if you guys are sharp and have been paying attention and maybe even starting to practice some of your programming a little bit, this is just going to be easy as it gets. So let's look at just a reminder is that with those different weeks from Joe Ken's complete or incomplete mesocycles, is we're going to have different levels of stress that we're going to apply. So we might start more in that moderate block with higher volume, and then our intensities may go up and our volume will probably drop into our volume block. And then our intensity, or our performance block, will probably have the least volume and highest intensity of all. I like this one better. So just something to keep in mind there. And what happens when we don't designate percentages? A lifter might start week 1. And let's say we do a few weeks of 10 reps and let's say we keep our volume the same for all 3 weeks. A lifter may smash themselves on week 1, somewhere up here. And then on week 2, they're down here. And then on week 3, they're right there. So there wouldn't be much progression there. That's why providing either percentage for them to train off of, or RPE, or reps in the tank, something like that directs them on how to train or how intense to be. Something like that can really help out. So there's just a few, several different factors that we just want to keep in mind and do our best to incorporate. And again, this is that view of sort of a concurrent training day, where maybe throughout the day we're actually sort of training different phases throughout a given day sometimes. So we wouldn't really, if we're developing strength, we may not necessarily do 6 reps or less on everything. We may not do, if we're doing power, we might not do 3 reps of it, 5 reps or less of everything. If we want to build hypertrophy, on the other hand, yeah, we might spend the majority of our time sort of in that optimal time of retention all along the way. But that doesn't mean we can't do some strength training on a hypertrophy day or hypertrophy on a strength day. Again, think about what sort of exercises are going to take place in the beginning of the lift, probably more power and strength development, and later on, be doing accessories. And we don't always train those accessories with a strength focus, because especially like a simple accessory. So let's say we're doing if you want to do a bicep curl, if you're doing a heavy bicep curl, that's so isolated and so focused that if the stress becomes too much, well, that's a good way to actually like tweak something in your bicep, because it's not really sharing the load anywhere. It's so focused and so isolated. Whereas a heavy squat, your core can give out, your legs can give out, you can, your joints can articulate. Whereas a bicep curl, you've got a couple muscles involved, and you've got one or two joints involved, and there's not much going on. So going real heavy with the bicep curl, there's actually a pretty good risk factor there. So there's different rationale and logic for how we're going to train, and that's just a drop in the bucket. So I want to bring up this little Venn diagram again. I think this is our last little bit of the today's discussion. So again, a rational strength training program is just going to be a blend of several things. It's going to be our time under tension and tempo table, making sure things match up there. Our build bench chart is another good one to incorporate. Training cycles and our periodization. Okay, so is the emphasis of the training cycle? Again, think back to our programming and periodization discussion, where we went through and we showed how a lineman would maybe plan out their year of training, and some types of the year, like in their postseason, they're lifting like 0 to 3 times per week, and there's really no designated goal going on right there. And then as they move into the off season, in the first half of the off season, they have more emphasis on muscular endurance and hypertrophy. And as they move into the second half of the off season, they're more focused on strength and power. And as we get into preseason, we're getting more into movement-specific qualities. So depending on when your population is training, this is also going to have a big impact. We're going to include that relative intensity chart. Whether you're training with exact percentages or not, you're still going to want to be aware of this chart, because if you're using perceived exertion, like ratings of perceived exertion, the RPE, or if you're using reps in the tank, that's still going to align and match up with these relative intensities. And so that's all sort of that science. There's a little bit of art in there, but this is where we really got to make sure that as exercise scientists, we remember that we also need to be artists just a little bit. Because if we put a great program together and somebody is just breezing through it, we may need to realize that they may not be receiving the challenge that's going to be the stimulus that's going to change their body. So remember, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. And we need to apply the right stimulus to get the right adaptation. And I think that's all we've got for today. So that was some microcycle feedback, looking at the exercise order that people are using, how they're pairing exercises together, how they're designating their tempos, their rest times, just the clarity of the program, and basically beginning with the end in mind. So just remember that that first microcycle is just going to be a building block towards a whole mesocycle, and that mesocycle is just a chunk of your macrocycle, and everything is just working towards your ultimate goals. It's okay to work towards multiple goals at the same time. But we should always remember to keep the goal. The goal is to keep the goal, as I've said many times. Awesome. Thanks, guys. That is it for today.